We are not labels. We can't be put in boxes. I always feel that describing yourself in somebody else's language makes it even harder to self-identify. Sometimes it's that unexpected stuff. It's that pushback. It's that skill set that nobody ever has, which is the missing link. We are more expansive than the sky and the stars. Like, we are unimaginable in our possibilities. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo. Today, I'm going to talk to you about something that's probably going to be controversial for a lot of people, especially in leadership, especially folks that work as consultants and do things like I do in terms of coaching and helping teams. And what I want to talk to you about today is the use of personality tests in the workplace. And I will say right off the bat that I am not a fan. And I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion. And I think why people use these is because it then becomes a tool to put people in boxes so that they can better understand themselves and that organizations can point out where the opportunity areas are, maybe where the weaknesses are. And frankly, oftentimes these personality assessments are used without the proper support. So oftentimes they're given in a one-day workshop, maybe a two-day workshop, and then people are left to their own devices to figure out now how to integrate this new information, how to assess what they find to be true, what they find to be not really true, and assess how they might be judging themselves or even how they were being judged by sharing this information with other people. You see, I think that the big challenge with these tools is that there is a large challenge with using it correctly. Like, you have to have the right support with this kind of information. And I think a lot of organizations just don't invest enough in making sure that these tools are used correctly. But that's actually assuming the tool is a great tool in and of itself. And I have a problem with any tool that wants to put you in a particular box and give you a particular label. And using labels that are not your own language, but some other contrived language. I think that, yes, these assessment tools can be very revealing. Yes, they can help you to see yourself more clearly. But what we lose is even more nuance. And that's where the magic of understanding yourself deeply comes from really understanding the nuance of who you are and using language that actually resonates with you, not language you're forced to use because that's what's in the assessment. And just to be clear, when I'm talking about assessments, I'm talking about things like Myers-Briggs, colors, DISC, all that stuff. I don't use these in my practice because I much prefer to help people see themselves by them using their own language, not being forced to say, well, what would you do in this situation? On this continuum, or A, B, C, or D. I think this creates this structure and system that's very much archaic and actually rather imperfect. It's like any idea of like garbage in, garbage out. I think that there are much better ways to help people understand themselves than forcing them into like binary answers or forcing them into one of four archetype boxes. Like, I think it's just really limiting. And because, people use these in ways that are not constructive, it adds to the destructiveness of these tools. So if you have somebody that's training with these tools, but they aren't that careful with it, or if they use it to shame attributes that the organization doesn't want, it can be very destructive in the workplace. So listen, I'm not one to be all or nothing about these types of things. But I do want to make a point that I am not a fan. But I also want to say that, look, using tools to better understand personalities and the way that we operate and how we make decisions can be helpful. But I think that what happens is, because these tools are so focused on the work environment and work decisions, what we're doing is we're leaving out the most important part of who we are, in terms of our intuition and in terms of the nuance of being human, like the complexity of it. And I think that a more free-form way of understanding who you are is going to be more resonant and actually more insightful. So that's why I never give out assessments, personality assessments in the work that I do, because I think that we can go so much deeper and people can find even more clarity when they're using their own words to describe themselves. In a little bit of a way, these assessments are a shortcut to doing the inner work of getting to know yourself more deeply. And if you know anything about me and what I talk about our human skills, which is the ability to be deeply introspective and understand our own patterns of thought and behavior. And doing that in an organic way, doing that in a way that honors nuance and honors like that I can get so much more information in talking to another human being by asking them a very specific question based on how they're answering me, based on my intuitive sense, based on what I'm seeing in the nonverbals, like that kind of identifying the right question, the best question to get underneath a deeper understanding is not something these personality assessments can do. And that's why I think they're flawed. And I think they don't take into account all aspects of our lives. And it only contributes to the idea of compartmentalization, right? So if you're identifying, hey, this is how I operate at work, and we're not really paying attention to, well, this is how I operate at home, then we're not seeing where the opportunities are to cross-pollinate and to connect the dots across who we are, period, versus the identities that we connect with. So I really want to support you in, if you are given these assessments at work, to really take a step back and make sure you understand how they're being used, how you want to use them, making sure that you are very aware of your prerogative, ability, and power to throw out what you don't want to take in, whether that's throwing out people's commentary about those results, and using discernment with these tools. Of course, they can be very helpful. But when they are used in a very specific way, in a very specific aspect of our life, I think, again, we're missing out. And one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about being careful about these assessments is because, look, I worked in multinational organizations for many years, and I've filled out many different kinds of these. And at one point, a facilitator was using these in a team environment, and I was singled out as having attributes that were not the norm on the team. And I was made to feel that this was a problem versus an asset. And this is the type of thing that I think can happen. I don't think my situation was isolated. And it's like any other tool to help you get to know yourself better. Like, you really have to go through some discernment process, some deep dive excavation. And that work is usually not supported in the work environment because companies aren't willing to pay for that. So it's like you know, working with some of these provide a lot of information and a lot of data based on how you answer the questions. And it takes some time to sift through that, discern what's going on here and what's true and maybe what's just based on something that's not a deep truth, but like a surface level thing. And also how we operate in our organizations is very conditioned. Right? So we're basically in these personality assessments being asked about our conditioned way of responding to certain situations and environments versus really understanding, well, if you took away all this conditioning, then who would you be? How would you operate? And I think tools that help you understand underneath your conditioning are the most helpful and most relevant tools. So I would encourage you to really think about how you want to either take in that information, or if you as a leader, do you want to be using these tools? And get to know them, get to know the origins of them so that you can make that assessment yourself of like, is this the best possible way to help people know themselves better? I mean, let's just be honest. If you think about it, if what you really want to do as a leader or in your organization is help people get to know themselves better, then we would be supporting work that helps people with the inner work, with the deep understanding of self, not through these arbitrary assessments and very contrived assessments and assessments that put you in boxes, but through other kinds of support, like coaching, like therapy even, like human skills work to help people understand their patterns of thought and behavior and how they show up at work and why they show up at work the way they do because of the baggage that they're bringing with them and the unresolved history. It's not just understanding, well, this is how you operate, but it's also about understanding where does this come from? Because once we can understand a little bit more about why we show up the way we do, we can make a choice about how do we want to show up now. Moving forward, is how we're showing up now something we're proud of or something we want to shift? And these assessments and the work that goes along with it doesn't usually take it to the next level. Like if, for example, somebody's like, wow, I really like to be better at relationships. These assessment tools don't help you to actually do the work on self-development. They help you to see who you are being now in that conditioned response that you've had for decades versus how would you show up authentically if you unlearned the things that you've learned in terms of how to survive or thrive in workplace environments that are looking for very specific personalities and very specific behavior patterns that they have deemed acceptable or desired in those environments. So I think it's just important to understand that there are limitations with these kinds of personality tests, and that's what I'm kind of inviting you to deep dive with on your own. I always feel that describing yourself in somebody else's language makes it even harder to self-identify. So a lot of times the work that I do, especially one-on-one, is helping people find the language that they really, really resonate with. So I want to offer you some questions that won't come in these kinds of personality assessments. What qualities am I proud of? What strengths do I lean on when times are tough? What do I admire in others that I'm not seeing or willing to admit within myself? What words do I love to use to describe myself? And what do those who love me the most say about me? So I also want to bring up that sometimes the unresolved history that I talked about, our baggage that we bring with us, comes because we've gotten feedback about ourselves, we've gotten assessments about ourselves, and they've been weaponized or used to shame us, used in not a constructive way, and that can linger with us. So this is also your invitation to say, if this has happened to you, then don't let it continue to fester. If the use of these kinds of assessments has you all twisted inside and it's sticking with you, even if you did this years ago, then I do want you to get support for yourself so you can clear the history of that. I don't want you to let it rot inside of you because you haven't processed how it really made you feel. Or maybe you don't even realize that doing some of these assessments did have an impact on you and that you have been carrying it with you. So if anything is coming up in this conversation with you, then honor that and trust it and let that be the sign of where you can do some more deep work with yourself. You could even start to journal about it so that you can release it and what has stayed with you. And come back to what you know is the truth about you, not with looking at these lists, but just free writing and explaining to yourself about yourself. That can be a very freeing exercise with no boxes, with no rigidity. Just how do I want to describe myself to myself in a way that feels true. So I think the other piece of this is when other people attempt to tell you who you are, whether it's through personality assessments or otherwise, and it's not true, and it's a projection or a judgment, then, hon, I want you to clap back. I want you to stand in your power and in your worth and exactly who you are. Allow that moment to be one where you get to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself and acknowledge that who you are is okay. It's not a flaw. There's nothing to be shamed for. And that if you bring something different than what everybody else around you brings, then say amen. That is the value that you bring. And it is the organization's problem if they are looking at that as a liability and not an asset. Because when you can look around and say, yes, I bring this unique thing to the team and to the table, that ought to be celebrated everywhere and not shamed for not conforming to the norm. That's where I think we lose out in leadership and in workplaces where we want everything to kind of be the same or everything to be something that we know what to expect, because sometimes it's that unexpected stuff. It's that pushback. It's that skill set that nobody ever has, which is the missing link. And it needs to be embraced rather than shamed or ridiculed or anything of that nature. So at the end of the day, my friend, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it is easy to use labels. It's easy to put ourselves in boxes and put other people in boxes and say, this is who you are. But that is not who we are. We are not labels. We can't be put in boxes. We are more expansive than the sky and the stars. We are unimaginable in our possibilities and in our depth and in our breadth and in our complexity. And so whether you want to, identify yourself in a bucket of one of 4 options or one of 16 options or one of 52 options, it's never going to really be the most articulate, truthful, authentic, honest expression of who you are, because you go beyond all of that. So remember, you are not one to be put in a box, and be discerning about what you let in to your heart and to your bones about what you believe about yourself. That's my big warning sign for personality assessments. I think that they are far from perfect, and they're often used in destructive versus constructive ways. And frankly, I think they're not used deeply enough. Maybe they can be the entryway into deeply understanding yourself, but what they're being used as is the entry and the ending of who you are in these work environments, and that's where I think the problem is. So thanks for tuning in, and by all means, I'm happy to talk to you if you have any questions or any pushback on what I'm saying. Happy to have a discussion about it. So you know how to get a hold of me in the show notes of whatever platform you're listening to this episode on. And yeah, thank you for coming to the Unlock Lab and for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now.